What was your happiest moment in your life?
Oh, that's surprisingly easy. I thought that was going to be hard. It was when my son was born.
Your son was born. That was your happiest moment.
I think partly because delivery was over, and so it was a huge relief.
Yes.
And probably partly the rush of hormones, but also just that feeling of love. My son is the center of my world in many ways. So that was a really happy moment when he arrived safely in the world.
What was your scariest moment in your life?
Oh, that is hard. What's my scariest moment? Many scary moments. The one that pops into my mind, the most recent, was being asked in this job to climb onto a roof to see some solar panels that had been financed by a British company on top of a Vietnamese factory. And I sort of said, oh yeah, definitely, that sounds amazing. And I had completely underestimated quite how high the building was. And and it was raining, the ladder was all slippery, and I had to climb up this very, very high ladder and then walk across a small path on the roof. And my heart was like, I'm not very good with heights.
Oh, okay. But you did it.
But I did it, and I felt a massive buzz after I'd done it, because I think it does feel really good to do things that scare you.
Yes.
Not at the time, but afterwards. You feel really proud of yourself, like, oh yeah.
What's the word experience mean to you?
What does the word experience mean? I think it means, that's a really hard question. Mm-hmm. You've got hard questions here. Yeah. No, it's not easy. No. I think the word experience means to me consciously learning in a moment. So rather than just passively drifting through things, I think you gain real experience when you are kind of conscious of what's just happened or what's happening, what's just happened, why, and you kind of reflect on it.
3 things that you would advise 18 years old Emily.
I think worry less and just get on with things. 2 would be speak up, say what you think. And 3 would probably be nicer to your family.
That's an interesting one.
I think I now, I get on so well with all my family, and I consider them amongst some of my best friends, my brothers and sisters and my parents. But going through that teenage bit, and when you're all still living together, there's a lot of moments where well, for me anyway, where I was probably a bit horrible to them. And I look back and think, oh, it was so lovely when we all lived together. But at the time, I probably wasn't always the nicest. So there. I'm Emily Hamblin, as you know, and I'm the UK's Consul General here in Ho Chi Minh City, and also the Director for International Trade in Vietnam for the UK government, and Deputy Head for Southeast Asia for Trade. So I've kind of got those 3 hats on in this role. And I've been here doing this job for 8 months, nearly 9 months, I think, and really enjoying it so far. It's been wonderful, busy and challenging, but a lot of fun.
I'm so glad to hear that. So now you are in Vietnam, being a senior diplomat, represent UK in Vietnam. Was it something that you always dreamed of when you were young?
So not specifically, and I think I came to this point in my career through quite a roundabout route, rather than directly working my way up through diplomacy, which I think is because I am interested in many, many different things. And I've always taken the approach of looking at what's the next exciting opportunity that I feel really passionate about and that I think I can bring something to. So as a result of that, I've hopped around a little bit. So when I left university, I applied to join the civil service, the UK's civil service, focused on domestic policy rather than international policy. And I did several different jobs in that space, working on science policy, business policy. I trained as an accountant and worked government finance for a while, which I really enjoyed, even though it maybe doesn't sound like the most exciting area. And then an opportunity came up in the embassy in Paris in France to run the UK's science and innovation network in West Europe. And so I learnt French in order to do that job, and that was my move into diplomacy. And then I realised that there was so much that I loved about diplomacy, and this job came up, which I thought was so exciting for so many reasons. I'm a real generalist and I have really broad interests. I'm interested in lots of different things, and I also really love learning new things. And I am weird enough to really enjoy studying. And I think that's always been the case ever since I was little. Well, I was actually originally born in Hong Kong. Wow. My family were there for 10 years, but only until I was 4. And then we moved back to the UK. But I grew up in quite a big family, 2 brothers and a sister. And it was always a very noisy household with lots of different debates going on and you know, arguments in a friendly way. So I think that also made me interested and curious and want to learn enough to defend my own opinions, and interested in lots of different areas. I really remember at points when I was young feeling under quite a lot of pressure to decide what I wanted to do and what I was most interested in. I think young people can often feel a pressure to take a big decision about what they're going to do. But in my experience, your career doesn't have to be like that. There's not one moment that you take a decision. You're taking decisions every few years about, is what I'm doing still the thing that I want to be doing and the thing where I can add most value? What are the other opportunities around? Where might I want to move into next? There's also a lot of value in people who are more generalist and are able to move from area to area and bring different perspectives, bring fresh perspectives, fresh challenge, learn again. And I think even more for our generation, if you look at our parents, I think it was much more likely that you would pick a career and a job and just work your way up in that field. Nowadays, I think a lot of the jobs that are going to be most exciting in 10 or 20 years' time probably don't even exist yet. So I think there's a real premium on people being open to new opportunities, willing to keep learning, keep moving out of their comfort zone, and keep retaking decisions about what it is they want to be doing, rather than feeling like they have to just decide at the beginning and then stick with that forever. So I think it's best to just get on with something you're passionate about and keep your mind open to changing, shifting to new opportunities as you go along. Yeah. So I think that's the thing. If you are doing new things and pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, it's scary and it's intimidating, and that's completely normal. And I think it's important to know why it is you're doing something and be clear why you care about it and why you think it's worth doing. One thing that I wish I'd realised earlier is that you are going to fail at moments. Everybody does. Yes. And if you don't ever have moments of failure, probably you're failing because you're not taking enough risks.
That's true.
So
That's true.
Failure is just a normal part of learning. And I think probably if I look back, the one thing that I wish I'd got comfortable doing earlier is just speaking up and having more confidence in my own opinions, remembering that you have an experience and a perspective that nobody else has. So if you share it, then that generally is useful for the conversation.
Right. Yeah. So learning is also very important.
Definitely. And I think to learn you have to be vulnerable, because you have to accept that you don't know things in order to learn effectively. And so,
was you always planning to study at Oxford? And did you face any challenges when you were studying at Oxford?
I definitely wasn't always planning to study at Oxford. And actually, I think I had a bit of a prejudice against Oxford and universities like that for some reason growing up, in that I thought it was a sort of stuck-up world in which I wouldn't belong. And so I was quite resistant to the idea of applying for a place at Oxford, which seems strange now, having been there and seen what a wonderful learning environment it was. And it did really open my eyes, I think, to some of the inequalities that exist in the UK system and around the world. I realised, at Oxford, even though it's improving quite quickly, and it's the same for many of the world's most prestigious universities, there's a very high proportion of people who've had expensive and quite exclusive educations. And I think I felt very intimidated by stepping into that world that wasn't very familiar to me beforehand. But yeah, so that's why I say, I think linking back to when I said I regret not having a bit more confidence in my own opinions earlier on, definitely my first few years at university, I spend a lot of time assuming that everybody else was much cleverer than I was, and
Oh, wow.
and worrying about speaking up. And I think learning to get over that was quite important. But I think the more that you do that and you put yourself in situations that are intimidating, then the more confident you get doing it.
So for the community, we're also talking a lot about social impact, like of the individual who want to make a difference in the community, care about the community.
Yeah.
So in our conversation before,
Yeah.
you mentioned a lot about your passion around women empowerment,
Yeah.
gender equality, and also climate change.
Yeah.
What did make you care about these issues?
Those issues.
Two sets of issues that are really close to my heart. I think in terms of gender equality, when I went to university and sort of was thrown into a different environment, I think that was the first time that I felt like my eyes were opened a bit to the issues of gender equality and some of the challenges that face women across a whole range of different issues. So, for example, in terms of sexual harassment or the risk of physical violence against women, I think in those years at university was the first time that I questioned the idea that I'd grown up with, which was that it was my responsibility to keep myself safe, and that it was a fact of life that I should feel scared walking home on my own, and started to think, well, actually, maybe I shouldn't be just accepting that that's the way the world is, and actually it's a community problem that should be solved, and it's not something that young women alone should feel responsible for keeping themselves safe, but actually the community, and including men, should be thinking about why is it that some parts of our society feel like that, and what actions can we take to change that. And then through to kind of women in leadership, where I realised more and more that there are many areas in which there just aren't enough women involved in leading, and that means that issues that really matter to half of the population might not even make it onto the agenda in different business sectors or in politics or government, just because there isn't anybody in the room and in the leadership discussion who has that perspective of being a woman. I read the other day that only 3% of ICT graduates globally are women, 3%.
Wow.
And if you think that, that's terrifying. And if you think that in the future, understanding these sorts of technologies, at least enough to be able to ask the right questions and know what's possible, that's where all the power will lie in lots of different sectors, I think. Because I think as technology transforms different sectors, the idea that 50% of the population aren't involved in that knowledge is really scary to me. And then on climate change, I think that's been more recent for me. I think it's been relatively recent that I've really realised that climate change is the biggest issue facing our generation. I think what really brought it home for me is I have a 3-year-old son, and for me that's made it feel much more personal and real, because when you listen to scientists about predictions of the kinds of impacts of climate change, in 2050, and then I'm looking at my son and thinking, oh, you'll be in your early 30s and experiencing some of this, and how will I answer your questions of, well, you guys knew this was going to happen, why didn't you do something? So I think it's a really important moment for change, for climate change. And again, it's a great agenda to be able to work on between the UK and Vietnam, because Vietnam is one of the countries in the world that is quite vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Both, 2 major deltas, for example, that are very sensitive ecosystems, and what we saw last year with the floods in central Vietnam, for example, the potential impact for extreme weather events. But also because Vietnam has, for example, just loads of potential in solar energy and wind energy, and that's an area where the UK is a leader globally as well. So there's lots of opportunities for Vietnam to be at the forefront of changing some of this, and lots of ambition from the government here to do that. So that feels like quite a positive part of the agenda. So that made me quite passionate and get very interested in these issues. And then it's been great in this job that I can think about what role I can play with the privilege of being the Consul General here for the UK. How can I shine a light on some of these issues, and what can I feel very lucky to be here and to get the opportunity to come and live here in Vietnam. I think in terms of, there are loads of opportunities that I see living and working abroad. I think the main one is that you meet a whole variety of different people, and it opens you up to different perspectives and different ways of living, different values. It makes you challenge some things that you had assumed and some of your own perspectives. And obviously it's just really hard to be away from family, particularly at the moment with a global pandemic. You don't have the same opportunities to pop back and connect with people. I think it can be quite lonely when you first move to a new country.
So we've been talking a lot about the career path and talking about your career path. Is this like a roundabout? It's not like it's like zigzag. It's not like it's not like one straight line. And I think this is something gonna be very normal and typical in the future, right now too, and in the future more, because we no longer have like you say earlier, it's not like our parents before. We have like very fixed career in one career, and then we're gonna stay until we retire. For example, it's quite different now with this fast changing world. So, do you have any advice for young people who kind of like being worried and nervous about this, and how can they prepare themselves to adapt to this new situation or new normal, and also for their future?
Stay as curious as possible, and to keep learning and to keep finding out about new things and new opportunities, and stay curious that way. I think try and stay determined. Don't be put off if you have moments of, oh, I'm not sure I'm doing the right thing anymore, or you know, I feel like this endeavour has not gone as I planned and it's been a bit of a failure. Try and love what you do. Try and do things you're passionate about. And I think the final thing I'd say is, whatever you do, something that helps me feel really rooted and grounded is just being clear about what you stand for and what your values are. So for me, things like kindness and empathy are really important. And even if there are opportunities to achieve something I really care about, but it would involve not living those values, then I wouldn't do it. And I think that helps to kind of put some limits on what's possible. You know, if you know what it is that you believe in and what your values are, then you can always come back to that.
Chương trình không thể được thực hiện nếu không có sự đồng hành của Apple và Soul Branding với Dear Community từ những ngày đầu. Nếu câu chuyện của nhân vật truyền cảm hứng hay khiến bạn hồi tưởng lại chính trải nghiệm, câu chuyện của chính mình, hãy gửi những lời chia sẻ qua email của chương trình tại địa chỉ dearcommunity@gmail.com. Bạn có thể nghe tất cả các câu chuyện của Dear Community trên các nền tảng như Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, được phát sóng vào ngày 2 và ngày 16 hàng tháng. Hãy để lại review của bạn để nhiều người có thể biết đến chương trình. Hẹn gặp lại các bạn. Mình là Tuyền, host của Dear Community.